Hi, I'm Edwin Samuelson, and welcome to the Cinefiles, a show that allows you to eavesdrop on the conversations of fellow film fanatics. Today we're discussing digital versus film. Now, Eric, you recommended this topic.
Yeah, I thought we'd mix things up a bit rather than review films like we usually do. Every now and then we do an episode that's about industry-related stuff. And I thought it'd be interesting this time to talk about this whole debate, about film versus digital. With the advent of technology, more and more people turning to digital use as opposed to actual analog film. There's a lot of controversy over which is better.
Well, the thing about this is that I've noticed, there's many discussions that that divide, quote, cinephiles, and I'm not talking about our show, I'm talking real cinephile people, is digital and film. I know people that will see a print that looks like shit projected in a theater because they say they'd rather see it on film than see it on video in a pristine element. Now, I can kind of understand, film and video. There is certain things that are different. Video, over the years, when it first came out, didn't look like film at all. Yeah. No matter how much you tried. However, in the last few years, I think that the video has come so close that it's almost it's almost on par. Not quite, but almost there. I think within the next few years too, you're gonna have to get used to it because you're gonna have no alternative. Because
well, keep in mind that's not the only part of the debate, though. Too, it's the whole issue about whether or not video looks like film or vice versa.
That's what I mean.
Is one debate.
Yeah.
That's one issue, and really it comes down to your lighting ability, like how you light a shot and stuff like that. Sure. But yeah, right now with certain kinds of film, it's with video, it hasn't quite got to the point where you can get the detail that you can get on film in terms of blacks and things like that. However, to the naked eye, it's barely distinguishable. It's gotten better.
I mean, I remember a few years ago I saw Collateral, Michael Mann's Collateral. Now, Michael Mann shot most of the film in 35 millimeter, and then he went and shot some scenes in video. That you could see easily which scenes were shot with video,
tell the difference.
And then you could see you could just see, okay, that's definitely shot video. This is not. But in the last few years, the shots have gotten so much better that it's really harder to tell when something is shot with video.
But it's also something interesting since you brought up Michael Mann. If you look at the movie Public Enemies, which he shot all in digital, one of the problems with the film is, sure, the picture is sharp, but since it's supposed to be a period piece, everything in the background does not look period. It looks like either it's a set or it's a prop. It doesn't look real.
Well, the thing about celluloid, I think, is it can also hide some of the finer details and things. If by your own choice, sometimes you don't want to see those nails, those nail heads, and those labels behind you because they're just there because they're not going to be out of the view of the camera.
However, now you're talking about something different. You're talking about frame rate.
Yeah.
Okay. On video, the frame rate, you can set the frame rate to 24 frames per second, and then therefore you can hide all those details like you would on film.
Well,
but a lot of videos isn't shot in 24 frames per second. It's converted to 24 frames in post-production.
Peter Jackson caused some controversy recently when he's shooting his new Hobbit films in 48 frames per second, which is twice the speed of normal film, which will give it a more lifelike quality. Now, as Peter Jackson has stated, and he is correct on this, people in the old days shot in 24 frames a second for economics because it was cheaper and that was the minimum you could do to have real motion where it looked like, people were really moving. He said if people could shoot in, 48 frames back then, they would have. The good thing about this is that you don't have to pay for film stock because everything is on a hard drive or a camera, so there's no real thing. And now when you ship prints, there is no prints you have to print up. They're all on a hard drive, so it doesn't cost anything.
This part of the discussion is about, okay, is video up to film in terms of look when it's projected on screen?
No.
We will agree that's not quite there yet, but it's getting pretty damn close.
I would say it's about 90% there.
And at this point, it's almost indistinguishable to the human eye. It's gotten so good on video. Now we're getting into the whole issue of like the 48 frames per second model and stuff like that. And this is where we get off into all sorts of tangents about the digital versus video debate, or digital versus film debate. And what I'm talking about is Peter Jackson, Steven Spielberg, James Cameron. Their influence over not just the film industry, but on the industry of multiplexes and cinemas in general, trying to push them into converting their projectors to being digital. That's being very hard on independent cinemas right now, because it's one thing to shoot digitally, it's another thing to project digitally.
Well, the thing that I've noticed in the last year, and it's something that's kind of disheartened me a lot, is now when you go to a revival screening, they have now something called DCP, which is a digital content package. In fact, the Film Forum, which is one of our biggest repertory theaters here in New York City, just showed Total Recall, the original Paul Verhoeven film. And this is a place that's really for real cinephiles, people who love and breathe and film. I mean, Cinemania, that's that theater. They showed a DCP version of Total Recall, which to me surprises me because, they seem like a very purist society. Like if they couldn't get a print, they wouldn't show it. Well, the studios obviously want to go towards a digital package because prints cost a lot of money. It costs about $5,000 to make a print, and then you have to ship a print. In fact, I was just told my friend showed a few films at the Anthology Film Archives. They had to pay $600 to ship the print to America from England and $600 to ship it back. That's a very big expense. However...
And you just talk about one print.
One print.
You got to make how many prints?
So it's like 3,000, 4,000 these days for a national release.
Ooh.
And then the thing about it is that, it costs, there's something called P&A. Prints and advertising. That's a very big bulk of a film's budget. In fact, when you see a film that comes out, let's just say a movie, you find out the newest Dark Knight movie costs $250 million. That doesn't include P&A, prints and advertising. Prints can add another $20 million on there easily. So the best way to do this is to upload the print, the digital version, to a server, and it's downloaded. It cuts out the shipping. You can download a print like instantaneously. That's why you're seeing a lot of these theaters do these live events and digital screenings now, is because this technology is possible. However, as Eric has mentioned, these projectors cost a shitload of money. They can be up to $100,000.
The conversion can be prohibitively expensive for a lot of cinemas.
Yeah, and a lot of theaters are going to go the way of the dodo because a lot of these independent theaters can't afford that. And it's very sad, too. And this is also going to kill the repertory theater experience, is that you're not going to be able to see a lot of these prints. A lot of these prints are just going to disappear.
Unless they're scanned.
Unless they're scanned.
This is the other. Then we get into the other topic about the advantages, disadvantages of digital versus film. Is also storage. A lot of people will say, okay, the con to digital is that, well, you have it in a hard drive, you have it on a disk, you can just that's the way you can just
in theory,
project
it's wonderful.
The problem is the technology is such that anything bad could happen. The famous story is Toy Story.
Yep.
Like a whole film was animated, it was stored in someone's hard drive, and they lost it. It got deleted.
Yeah, think about that. This film had never touched human hands. This was all digital on a computer. And they went back to re-release it, and they said a third of the film was corrupted, and they couldn't use it. They had to go back and reanimate it.
However,
yes,
that was then. Technology has advanced so quickly since then that now we have, cloud, storage,
right,
virtual storage. On top of that, this is objectively looking at it. You have the risks you have with celluloid, analog film, are at this point kind of comparable to the risk you have with digital now.
True.
Because with celluloid, even though technically celluloid can last longer than, say, a hard drive technology, but it's more flammable.
Fades.
It fades. It does need to be archived and stored a specific way. I used to work for a photo agency that oversaw one of the largest historical photo archives in the world, and they have all this that you can't scan all the stuff. There's so much of it, so you have to store it in a temperature-controlled environment,
like salt mines.
Right, and that costs a lot of money.
Yeah, in fact, that's why if we were talking about that, the Tonight Show, the Johnny Carson show, they had all the tapes. And it was just taking up a lot of room, and they said we can't afford this, and they tossed. That's why the first 15 years of the Tonight Show don't exist anymore. They tossed it because they said it was just too cost prohibitive to store the stuff. However, on a hard drive, it's not really that big a deal. But it's really sad that a lot of these prints too, they're just going to disappear. There's going to be a lot of lost films because
but
of this
also
conversion.
a lot of things, even like movies shot still on film these days, are still scanned, and they're edited on a nonlinear editing system like Avid or Final Cut Pro.
Right.
So a lot of that stuff is scanned anyhow. Now, I'm not here to say that, oh, gee, this is better than the other. It's just a simple, it's like, there's a lot of like hysteria over everyone's like, oh my God, it'll no longer be 35 millimeter, 75 millimeter prints. The whole experience will disappear with the way of digital. Yeah, as a film purist, I'm kind of concerned about that too. I would love, in my mind, I would love to know that there are cinemas out there that can still do that and will exist to do that. However, unfortunately, the cost of film is that I was listening to a podcast recently, and I think it was, I can't remember what the show was, where you know, they were saying, the guy was saying, who's a film person, like, I don't understand why people keep saying digital is cheaper. It only costs you could take the $5,000 and rather than put it towards CGI, put it towards, you know, making a film print, which will make your film look better anyway. And I kept thinking, but you don't understand something here. Have you ever made a movie? Even a short film?
I would never work in film.
I mean, for one thing, I do not miss the days. Like when I was a film student, I do not miss the days of working with film. I do not miss the days of having to depend on a processor or a person to develop that film and fuck it up. And then I have to reshoot the whole thing. I do not miss the days of working with a hot splicer, you know, and then maybe that doesn't get it right, and then the film breaking apart in a projector. I do not miss those days.
I will say that that's the one thing that makes me happy is, you know, we do film together. You know, well, not film, we do video work. And I could not, under any circumstance, do the amount of work editing a feature film. It's a lot of work. You have to hire, have to have a real editor. You have to cut a work print. It's a lot of extra overhead, and it takes a lot longer. It takes twice as long to make a film. With video, you have it immediately.
Which, to be fair,
to lower the budget,
doesn't really happen that much anymore, because when something's shot on film, it is scanned.
Yeah.
And they deal with it on, you know, what we call non-linear editing systems like Final Cut Pro.
Final Cut Pro, Avid,
you know,
Premiere.
Very few people do the hot splicing anymore.
I will say though, I prefer the way a film looks when it's shot on film, but I don't mind digital projection as much as some people do. I think digital projection, there is an advantage. You know, as I'm talking about people who really prefer seeing a film print, you know, I would love to see a nice pristine film print, but sometimes you don't have that option, and I'd rather see a nice movie filmed on film, digitally projected, than see some print that's been, you know, has guitar scratches on it and
Agreed,
paint.
and also depends on the circumstance. Sometimes, you know, digital projection can be really crappy too.
Yeah.
Like I've stayed in theater with no sound, and it's like a small projection. You know, it's sort of a small projection room. It's the same thing though. Like you know, like we talked about the film forum. Yeah, I admire the devotion to film archiving and all that stuff, but it's a pretty uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, you have
going
holes in the middle of the
experience.
theater.
Exactly.
The seats are uncomfortable, and the screens aren't that big.
No,
you
so
know,
home theater screen is bigger than some of those
right.
screens. I know exactly what you're
It's
talking
apples
about.
and oranges. Depends on the circumstance.
Well, you know, I mean, let me ask you this: would you guys rather see a print that's been mangled to hell, or would you rather see a digitally projected, a nice pristine print?
Well, you just kind of said it in your question. Of course,
I mean,
I'm going to want to see something that looks better and is more visually appealing. I come down just like you. I don't really mind as long as the film looks good, because, for instance, I saw The Master, and I saw the 70mm print, and I saw the regular print. Now, I know either way it's film, but to me, when I watched 70mm versus the regular print, I didn't notice too much of a difference. And my thing is, as long as when I'm watching the film, I can still see everything and it looks the way it's supposed to be, like color-wise, it still feels rich and everything, I have no problem with it. Now, if I watch a digital projection, and again, it gives me just the same sense of, you know, everything looks right, the picture, the colors, everything's right, I have no problem.
Thank you.
Now, I will be, of course, as a film fan, I'm nostalgic for film, because that's what I grew up watching. But I have nothing against digital. And as a wannabe filmmaker, with digital, you can afford to do more short films and projects you want to do. Whereas when it was film, you had to save up. You had to, as you were saying, all the different aspects you had to look at before you could even necessarily film. Nonetheless, post-production.
Well, perfect example is like the Cinefiles. If Eric and I had to shoot this show on film, you would see maybe 1 or 2 shows a year. It's a lot more work and overhead and a lot more expensive.
And people also like to own a camera, to own a film camera. It's far more expensive than a video camera these days, obviously.
And maintenance.
But at the same time, like people say, well, you know, 16mm cameras are that expensive. You had a Bolex or a Bell & Howell. No, they weren't. But then you'd have to blow up that film, that 16mm film to 35mm or whatever, and that costs a lot.
Perfect example. Yeah, Evil Dead, the first one. That was all shot on 16, and they had to blow up to 35. I bet you if Sam Raimi had a choice today and he had the digital technology, he would definitely go with the digital technology.
Having said that, going back to what you're saying, would you rather see a mangled film print versus a digitally projected print? But I could turn that around and say, well, would you rather see a good film print versus a poorly calibrated digital digitally.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's my problem.
Because there's disadvantages and advantages to both.
I think a perfect analogy of this is look at the way the music industry has been. Years ago, they had the vinyl. Vinyl was the popular standard for almost 20 plus years. Then it was 8-track. 8-track was great because it allowed people to take their own music into their car, and that became very popular. However, the sound was crap. Then it became cassette. Cassette killed vinyl and 8-track, and it became the choice of medium. Then CDs came out, and CDs killed tape.
Remember mini disc?
Yeah, I had a mini disc. I had one. The mini discs were great too because they allowed you to record. But then anyway, the CDs came out. They were very popular for almost 20 years, and now it's MP3s. Everything evolves. Technology evolves. I prefer owning a CD. I rather have it. But today's younger generation prefers downloads because they want it now and they don't want an actual media. I want a CD, but that's just the way I am. And you know what? There's people who are purists because that's what they're used to because they're Luddites.
Well, but the vinyl's making a huge comeback now. I mean, it's but the things.
I don't miss vinyl. I miss the album artwork. I'd rather have a CD.
Yeah, it comes. I mean, I don't think film itself. It's going to be a long time before celluloid, what we call analog film, will go away. Where it's a point where the technology is so advanced, you won't notice the difference and you won't miss the old stuff.
Well, there'll be people like Spielberg who will probably use film to the day he does.
I'm just hoping that there is someone out there right now taking these prints that haven't been digitized yet and fully restored yet. And I just hope that they're scanning them all before it does reach the point where things are no longer manually projected.
Well,
they're only digitally projected.
There's going to be a problem with that because a lot of the people are getting rid of this equipment right now. They're going to be getting rid of it in the near future because, I'll give you a perfect example. It's think about your VHS tapes, right? You have a lot of VHS tapes you haven't digitized yet. Good luck trying to find a VCR today to digitize them. You can't find one. I mean, they're out there, but they're much harder to find. And it's going to be a point where you can't find them at all anymore. You can't just go into a store right now and buy a VHS player.
Well, I think this is a little different, though. I think that like an MGM or like a major or Universal, something like that. They do have in place ways of taking their libraries and digitally scanning them, restoring them.
Well, a perfect example is Led Zeppelin a few years ago released a DVD, like their concert performances, and they had a weird tape format that didn't even exist anymore, and they had to go all over the world looking for a machine, and they finally found one in China, like one of the only machines to transfer this footage. I just hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it will because there's so many 35 millimeter ways of transferring things out there, but what's going to happen? A lot of these films could end up destroyed or gone. Like a perfect example, The Wicker Man.
Yeah.
That was tossed and thrown into a garbage dump, and it's on a landfill. No one knows what happened. It's gone. We'll never see a nice version of The Wicker Man uncut.
What do you think, though, about Spielberg, Jackson, Cameron trying to kind of trying? This is where I'm going to get to the dark side of the whole digital movement. You do have these three powerful guys,
right?
Mm-hmm. And they're basically trying to shove this down our throats. I mean, if you want to, and in a way that does make me feel uncomfortable. We're like, no, this is the future. You're going to like it, and this is the way we're going to do films.
Perfect example: 3D. I don't like 3D, but they keep forcing it down. In fact, it's harder to see a movie in 2D.
And you wonder why ticket prices are so high? It's because of this shit.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah. I mean, it's forcing theaters to raise their ticket prices, accommodate the new technology that these guys want the theaters to use.
But at the same time, it's actually lowering the price of technology because they don't have to pay for prints and shipping prints. So they should actually be reducing the price of tickets.
Eventually, but the technology isn't there yet. Right now, it's the timing is weird.
AMC theaters, which is here around nationwide, has converted all their screens to digital. Every one of their auditoriums is now digital. So, they should be lowering the prices, except they just raised them up another $1. And, I don't understand why 3D costs $5 more. It's anything different. Maybe the glasses, charge $1. Charge $1 for the glasses, or let us bring our own glass. We can reuse them, recycle them. I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't think I have to pay $20 to see a movie.
Well, the problem is, though, you have to understand something about 3D technology. It depends on what kind of 3D technology under which the film was shot.
Usually it's
because
real
sunglasses aren't going to work with other
Right.
some
Oh,
films.
okay.
Because there's shutter technology and then there's just Polaroid technology. But that's a whole other discussion about the
Yeah, it makes me angry. I think that's a perfect example. That's why I wanted to talk about the ticket price. Is that these new technologies? I remember years ago when I first it was like I think it was like 2003. I remember you had to pay an extra surcharge to see a digital projection of Terminator 3, which I did, and I thought, wow, it looks really nice. It was a lot more colorful. The one thing that is an advantage of prints, I'm sorry, of digital technology is that you don't have to worry about scratches and the print fading, and it's wonderful because you get really nice color in things. But I paid a surcharge to see this print anyway, and now that these theaters all of them have these digital projectors, they don't have to pay for the shipping of prints, and I think that really should come back to us.
Yeah,
Why raise the prices?
But
up?
you're not. I'm not. What you're saying is kind of disingenuous because there's other factors as well that have nothing to do with. One, the theaters themselves are paying for the digital conversion, which is a lot of money, and especially if it's a multiplex, they have to do that with all their theaters across the nation.
One thing that's why they should.
One,
yeah.
Two, and then you have to get it, which has nothing to do with digital. You have to get into the whole issue of the economics between the film studios, the distributors, and the cinemas, which compounds the issue, because we all know the reality of economics with movie chains is that they can't really make money off of the films they screen within the first 2 weeks of its release. They're only allowed to make money off those films after it's like after the third week or second run. And they don't do second runs anymore like they used to do.
Sure. No.
So they have to raise the ticket prices and they have to charge a lot for concessions.
If that's true, I think that the studio should be helping pay for this thing because you know what? They're the ones benefiting by spending less money making and sending prints.
But you know what? Sometimes this is the ingenious thing about the studios. It becomes this like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. The cinemas aren't going to say no to the studios because they need product to bring people in.
True.
And so you got people like Cameron, Spielberg, Jackson, who are well-intended, well-meaning. They're like excited about technology, but they don't seem to understand of the fiscal effect this is going to trickle-down effect it's going to have, on
the average film.
Well, and the film goers, on the people running movie theaters, on the specifically the independently run theaters that are across the United States. I mean, some of these guys are trying to solve the problem by running Kickstarter campaigns to raise money so they can convert to digital.
It's very sad because you know what? A lot of these smaller theaters where you see a lot more interesting films, and it's sad because, I mean, you're going to see a lot of them go away to the dodo bird. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the end of revival houses in the near future because, you know what? It's just they're not going to be any. There's not going to be any to project those type of prints.
Well, speaking of digital, and this is kind of a side, not really an issue, but sort of like a new thing that's happening in terms of distribution. The whole idea now that, the revival houses are going to go by the way of dodo, unfortunately. I mean, hopefully a few will be here to stay, just so that people can still, experience that, seeing a 35mm print of something or whatever. But now the whole new distribution models for independent films are no longer, it's shown in screens, for like a month. And then it goes direct to video. Now it's the opposite. It goes on video on demand first, and they may screen for a week somewhere.
Yeah, they do that because they can advertise it saying that it played theater when it eventually hits video. Because back when I was younger, they did a lot of direct-to-video films, and most people would not want to see these because they were of less quality than a feature film.
True.
So the best way to get people interested is that it played theaters, and that means it was worthy enough to play in the theaters. It's an old trick. In fact, today you don't open a movie in theaters to make money. You open it to promote the video and other releases. Right. It's a very sad state of affairs.
Jeff just recently took a course in digital filmmaking.
Yes.
And you see, I went to film school, and when I went to film school, I actually learned to use like 16mm cameras and 8mm cameras, the Bolex, the Bell and Howells, and I was there on the editing bays. When you can rent the editing bays when they're available to the students, and you're a student now. You're part of a generation that doesn't know what that's like.
No. You hear about it, but you don't really know anything about like how to use those cameras. You have a gist of, you load film into a camera, you film, but you don't know about the editing part. Because even now, when I took my film course, they taught us everything about production, but you had to take a totally separate class if you wanted to learn about editing. all that footage that you took, because they teach everything about lighting, teach everything about the camera, teach everything
As they
about
should.
the sound. But, you know, when it came to, now that you have this footage, what do you do with it? You have to take a different course for it.
Right.
And whereas, I don't know, maybe back in your day, was that just part of the overall? No, not too long ago, but, you know, when you were learning film, when you were learning just on film, did they wasn't that a part of?
When we were learning film, we also had to learn photography,
Okay.
because it's a similar approach. With video, this is what's interesting now at the advent of the advance of technology and progression. What's happened now is I believe I'm not going off on a tangent. DSLRs, digital cameras, are now able to shoot video that's on par with the best video camcorders in the market. And as a result of that, that's a big deal for a lot of filmmakers, because up until that point, with the exception of something like the Red,
Interchangeable lenses.
which is almost like impossible to get a hold of one and actually use one and own one, a video camcorder was basically that, a camcorder. You know, and you could have a filters or whatever, or an adaptive lens, but basically it's a camcorder. With DSLR cameras, you can simulate the feel of a movie camera in the sense that you're dealing with f-stops now. You're dealing with, you know, film speed in the way that an actual film camera would, and interchangeable lenses. And there's an inconvenience to that if you're used to camcorder shooting in the field.
It's tough. I switched over. It's tough. It's a different technology.
But if you're a guy that like grew up on, you know, I'm also a bit of a photographer. If you grew up on photography and the old school, you know, film cameras, it's actually a joy to go back and return to that, because you have a certain amount of control when you're setting up shots that you can't have.
Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about let's talk about the positives of digital filmmaking, because we haven't really talked about the one major positive. Is that this technology now is so affordable that people like you and I can go out and make a film for pennies on the dollar of what it used to cost. And the thing I can guarantee you this, most of those filmmakers who made their first film, let's just say Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper, Sam Raimi, George Romero, I don't think they would go to film. I think they would embrace this technology of using video. The only reason they shot on film is because this film stopped, because they had to, because it's the only thing available.
Yeah.
But I guarantee this, George Romero would have definitely shot on video if it was good, almost as good as film, to make his budget stretch more and be able to do more elaborate stuff on film. I'm excited by that, because you know what? These days, the problem, I mean, that's another problem in itself, but we have so many new films coming out. The problem is there's so many of them, and there's not really good distribution methods to find and discover a lot of these films, but there is more films being made today than ever.
Yeah, I think that's what gives digital video a bad rep. Actually, is the idea that everybody, oh yeah, it's so much cheaper now. It's so much, the equipment's so much more accessible, and therefore everyone thinks they can make a movie.
And as my friend Jeff said, Lieberman, he said, not just because you can make not anyone can make a film. Anyone can make something that looks good, but that doesn't mean they can make a real movie.
Actually, not everybody can even make something that looks good. You know, just because you have a video camera and you can shoot something, you know, a lot of people out there, what gives digital video a bad rep is a lot of people making this stuff have no idea how to really use a camera, have no idea how to light stuff, have no idea how to set up a shot, you know, all that stuff.
There's a good topic for debate on the Facebook discussion page, and let us know your thoughts on what you think of digital video. I think it's exciting, however, there are some drawbacks. And I think we discussed them here. So
yeah, this wasn't a debate on which is better, which is a discussion of the pros and cons. And
I'm more of a student here.
That's one thing I know we can all agree on. No matter what format you use, there are drawbacks and positives to everything. Not everything is perfect.
And to be fair to digital technology, the technology is improving incredibly fast, where we'll get to the point where a lot of those problems we associate with digital will be solved. That's it. That's it.
Well, I'm Edwin Samuelson for the Cinefiles, and thank you for watching. And until next time, that's it.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!